Hello, welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Cornelia Lucey. Cornelia is an author and an award-winning leadership consultant and psychologist delivering transformational positive psychology for large-scale multinationals, small businesses and startups. Cornelia, good afternoon. How are you?
Afternoon, Matt. Yes, I'm very well. How are you doing today?
Good. Very positive. Positive day today. Good to chat.
Yeah.
So the goal today is to have an open and honest conversation, not only about your mental health journey, but also into positive psychology to understand a bit more about it and how it's how you teach it and how it works for you, and to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you along your way and are available and accessible to other people. And by discussing your journey, both personal and professional, we hope to share and normalize the conversations we're about to have about your own mental health, as people are not alone in these experiences. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds brilliant. I'm really glad that you're doing this podcast, Matt. So yeah, that sounds really good.
We are very pleased to have you, both in terms of not only your mental health journey, but also the grandness of positive psychology, and to understand a bit about that, because frankly, I don't know very much about it. I thought it was basically focusing on the positive elements of psychology, which turns out it's not.
Yeah, wow, that's great that you know that. That makes me so happy that you know that, because I cannot tell you the number of people that I work with, family members, friends, who think it's all about just being positive, and it's actually nothing to do with that. So I have to spend a lot of time trying to break it down. And do you want me to explain a little bit about it?
Yeah, please do.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, and actually the person who named it positive psychology, it's his biggest regret. His biggest regret is naming it positive psychology. So a guy called Martin Seligman is the kind of founder of the kind of wave of positive psychology, and it was established in the US just at the turn of the millennium, so just around 2000s, 1999 actually. He was the president of the American Psychological Association. He is a massive clinical psychologist. And so his specialism in psychology was clinical psychology. Okay. And depending on how much you know about clinical psychology, it has dominantly been about the deficit side of human beings.
Yes.
So understanding the deficit of, I guess, mental illness, really.
Almost like that kind of deficit being kind of the lack of, and
exactly the lack of what's missing, where's the absence. And so, he was doing, looking back on his career, making this keynote and just thinking, we basically really missed a massive trick here. We've spent hundreds of years when looking at what's wrong with people, when thousands of years ago we had people like Aristotle, some great philosophers actually exploring what's right with people, what are the things that bring the best out of people. So basically positive psychology is all about, so kind of dictionary definition is what is it that creates optimal functioning in human beings, and it's the scientific study of that. Okay. So what are the things, the emotions, the situations, the experiences that can actually bring the best out of us? And so and actually sometimes it's negative emotions that can lead to the best positive experience we can have. And actually there's been different waves of positive psychology, in the fact that there's been a second wave, third wave. Won't bore you with that bit, but thinking about our whole experience and a whole range of positive emotions and negative emotions, if you want to call them negative emotions in inverted commas, is really important to positive psychologists. So actually learning from the difficult experiences that we have as individuals, as teams, as organizations, as societies, communities, all of those learnings are really important, and learning, what can bring the best out of someone in order to help them bring the best out of themselves or their team is so important. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, which I knew that we would do.
Yeah, no, well, it's perfect. But it's interesting because how I've always not interpreted positive psychology, but what really kind of, what really kind of sings to me from my kind of own kind of professional, personal experience is that kind of idea of like empowerment. It seems to be kind of almost like empowerment psychology. It is looking at, empowerment is a process going for people from a psychologically disempowered to an empowered state. It seems like that positive psychology is looking at those, the mechanisms, the feelings, the thoughts that enable a person to be confident and capable. And
totally.
the interesting thing is that when someone isn't confident and capable, because there are many successful people who, definition of success, whatever it is, in terms of like money, wealth, family, whatever it is, who you actually, in some respects, would say are disempowered, but are still, in some respect, in some metric, are still successful. I certainly, you see within the kind of entrepreneurial community. I mean, frankly, that community is full of mental health issues, and it's fascinating that, because I think for me, and I'll try and work it in my head, that kind of the optimal human function society now. Does that mean that what we're trying to achieve optimally, can we not achieve when we're disempowered? Because it seems to me that there's a lot of disempowered people who do, on the surface, perform very, very well and very, very successful. But I suppose from within, they're not necessarily having very fulfilling, wholesome lives.
Okay, so you've hit something on the head there. I think, Matt, that's about really understanding what optimal functioning is. And so the science of well-being, and well-being has two dimensions. There's hedonic aspects to well-being, there's eudaimonic aspects to well-being. And actually, to be fully optimally functioning and to have a really holistic sense of well-being, we ideally need to be striving to have that mix and that array. So you might see people who are experiencing some of the hedonic elements of success,
right? I see.
But aren't actually truly contented, connected. Now, it's interesting, you used the word confident earlier on about people being confident, and confidence is a really interesting one, because actually what we see is not necessarily what is going on. And I prefer the words self-determined. And so, looking at things like self-determination theory, someone who's feeling like they've got autonomy, that they feel that they've got connectedness in their life and they've got purpose. Those are things that can really make us feel, okay, this is good. What I've got going here, this is good.
Is that a form of internal confidence?
Exactly.
Was that a bad way to put it? Because I love that kind of idea, that kind of self-determination, but it seems to be connecting the external and internal web together, whatever that is in terms of confidence. I agree. That sounds interesting.
I like to think about it like alignment, like there's an alignment going, or there's like an integration going on a little bit. And I know that you're going to kind of ask me a little bit about my backstory. So I don't know if you want me to kind of...
I was just thinking that. I was interested. I was saying for someone to be so knowledgeable on this specific area, and I've had friends who study psychology, and often those that study psychology don't just happenstance. They don't just stumble across it. They've had some experiences. They're interested in themselves and interested to understand a little bit more. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your journey.
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you a bit, Matt, and I'll kind of go back to the beginning a little bit, but do tell me if I kind of go off on any tangents, and feel free to bring me back on the track.
Do not worry.
So, and it's interesting you say that about psychology and people that that have gone into that regard and into psychology. And I certainly felt that way when I was at university meeting kind of friends who'd studied psychology and things like that. Now, I didn't study psychology at university. It was actually, not until later on in my career that I went into psychology work, and I'll kind of explain a little bit about that. I actually was really interested in people and their stories, and that's, I guess, where I started out. But if you kind of rewind back to birth,
let's go all the way back. Day one.
Day one, I guess you see me in an enormous, huge Irish family full of loads and loads of incredible relatives, cousins, etc., etc. Now, my actual kind of nuclear family, my dad wasn't very well when I was growing up, and he struggled with his own kind of issues. Now, at the time, it wasn't, a time period where people explored mental health or looked at mental health or engaged in mental health like we would now, or like we try and do, although I do think there's still massive stigma out there, and I know that we'll talk about that. But, I kind of grew up with a very dysfunctional father and an incredible mum who was desperate to kind of bring her children up in an environment which she knew wasn't perfect. but for reasons of religion and culture, didn't feel that she could remove herself from a dysfunctional situation. And I guess we could kind of go into that a little bit further, but the reason I tell you about that is I actually didn't really become conscious of, and I say the word conscious deliberately, because I think we had different levels of consciousness and awareness of, you know, different things in our life as we would grow older. But I genuinely didn't really think about my mental health or anything to do with my mental health until I would say I was in my kind of mid-20s, when I started to become, or kind of early 20s, where I started to have different situations arise. So I was your kind of typical high achieving, super perfectionist, speak multiple languages, you know, first class honours, like, you know, loads of bags of qualifications and accolades. And
well, I have seen the number of letters after your name is longer than your first and last names put together.
This is true, which is really, you know, bizarre. So
but that obviously is because of something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what drives us, what motivates us, what kind of pushes us to do things, and I'll talk a bit about that. But yeah, so it's not until, I guess, I fast forward from growing up in this kind of weird environment where I'm desperate to get to school. I cannot wait to get to school. I cannot wait to learn. And learning is my drug. I love learning, and it continues to be to this day. I absolutely love it. And I'm kind of in my 20s. I'm doing very well professionally. I've done a kind of a range of different things, you know, paid kind of journalist program, trained as a journalist, did amazing things, like interview people like Amy Winehouse, traveling on planes to China with like prime ministers and things like that, and doing all these interesting things. And genuinely not giving a second thought to mental health, not really thinking that that's something that I need to think about. I don't have any kind of challenges. I'm absolutely, you know, rock hard. You know, I grew up in the East End of London. You try and steal my bag. So kind of going through this, quite oblivious really to mental health, and then moving into different careers. I, through my journalism career, became really interested in the education system, and I've always had this real strong driver for social justice, for societies, communities to have equal rights, and I have this like ridiculous sense of fairness, which is one of my values and something that really is important to me. And so I kind of go from this glittering journalism career into deciding to actually go into teach in a really challenging schools. So I actually go into something called the Teach First Leadership Development Program, which is a combination of working in kind of tough schools, in inverted commas, and you're doing lots of leadership development and training. So that's when I'm starting to become much more reflective, much more self-aware, much more, I guess, even again, kind of curious about, why do we behave the way we do? Why do we think the way we do? Why is this child in front of me doing this? And, you know, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to help them, and they're doing this. What's going on here?
And is that because of the training prompt those questions?
That training, and I think because of my younger childhood experiences, and I'll kind of, I suppose, gel that together for you in a moment, I have this ridiculous level of empathy and social awareness. So I am trained for various reasons to notice what's going on in a room. Okay, so I'm hyper aware, I'm hyper vigilant, I'm really, really conscious, and that in a way is, you know, it's my superpower now. It's why I really enjoy the work that I do now. I love observing people, noticing what's going on, sharing what I'm noticing, you know, all of those kind of things. So I'm in schools, and then I'm working with the adults in the schools who are, you know, head teachers, senior leaders, and you've got some incredible ones doing amazing things, bringing really incredible things out of people around them. And then you've got people who are behaving appallingly and doing terrible things, treating people really badly, disempowering. And I'm really glad you picked up on that word earlier on and talked about empowerment. And I'm like, well, what is it? What is it, the behaviours, and what are the things that people do that actually really empower people? So at that point, I'm then going on to kind of explore more, because I'm thinking that that's all about leadership. So I'm thinking if we understand more about leadership, we kind of get the key to this, to the answer to the questions that I've got. And so I go on to, I develop as a management consultant, you know, get onto a training program, I get developed. Then I'm working kind of in the Middle East, I'm working in England, I'm working with loads of different organisations, I'm seeing loads of different leaders, and becoming increasingly curious about the good ones and the bad ones, and all these kind of things. Now, it's in certain professional experiences. So when I'm working as a teacher and things are really tough, I'm experiencing kind of very like difficult emotions at times. But it's not until there's kind of a situation when I'm consulting and working in a particular organisation where I experience a really challenging professional dynamic, where I basically have a boss, not my boss, like different bosses, one of whom is, I guess, in a way, doing all the things that are disempowering me and making me feel really disenchanted, disconnected. And at the same time, having this really weird experience where working with other people who are really empowering me. And that's, I guess, where I become more interested in seeking out with the leaders who are really strong and I'm working with, what is it that you're doing that's doing all these great things to me, versus what other people are doing. And it's at that point where I become interested in coaching psychology, and I start kind of exploring coaching psychology more, training in coaching psychology. But I also have a particularly really difficult experience at work where I decide, actually, this is too much for me to work out on my own. I need to go and get some therapy. So it's kind of like in my mid-20s, I go and get some therapy to try and just help me unravel some of the difficult experiences that I'm having.
And just on that point, because that's the first time you've maybe mentioned that, you've kind of acknowledged something about yourself and mental health. Did you... You're on this very, what people consider, upward trajectory of success, and you've got qualifications, you've got experience, you've got, you're working with high powered people, and then you're coming to a stage where you're thinking, actually something isn't quite right, or I'm facing a block that I need to overcome. And what made you kind of what made you take that kind of, because from that perspective it seems quite dramatic, or was it actually quite logical from your perspective in a learning environment where you're saying something's not right, I'll educate myself about this area. Okay, a lot of people go see a therapist, I'll go and see a therapist. Is that the kind of maths that kind of worked out?
Really good questions. I love your questions, Matt. And it's really interesting because I do a lot now in trying to understand behaviour change and what is it that triggers behaviour change? Like, what is it that triggers someone to go and do that, to go and see the therapist, etc. And I think there are, I could go into all the behaviour change science around this, but boiling it down to two things. I think people need to be in either a really, really good place and they're wanting to keep that place, they want to keep that going, and they think there's something they need to work on, or they're in a really bad place where something difficult has really happened. And at the same time that I'm going through this really difficult experience with work, which completely throws me, so I think I am caught off balance, I'm at the same time starting a new relationship, which is with my now husband, and I'm finding it, I think at that point in time, the best way to describe it is I'm just feeling completely overwhelmed with everything that's going on and completely distraught. And I'm experiencing these feelings that I just feel are taking me over so much, to a point where my current experience, the way I'm feeling, isn't necessarily reflective of what's going on in the present. And I think it's, his support, talking with him, thinking about things, me knowing friends who've kind of gone to therapists, that kind of thing. I think at that point, I'm thinking, now interestingly, I go on to have an even worse kind of crisis point. So at this point, I'm just thinking, I need to explore this. I feel like I want to go and look into this a bit more. And I think that's something you should do. And I'm curious about, through different conversations with different people, like what could be triggering this. So it's difficult to maybe kind of give a black and white answer to the question, but I guess there are a few different factors going on that are kind of propelling me in that direction. So I go and work with a therapist for a small period of time, like a few months, which is really helpful, and she helps me to kind of figure out and structure out the work situation, what's going on there, why I might be feeling that. But she also helps me to start to connect with the fact that some of what I'm feeling at the moment is actually triggering some things that I've dealt with in the past as a child. And that's, I guess, where I haven't necessarily before that point made any connections between my past and now. I've kind of put a box around that, thinking that box will keep it there.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry to interrupt. It just how you articulated that was very, I suppose it really, at the very beginning of your conversation, you always talk about school being the place where you wanted to be. And how I interpret that was not that you wanted to learn, but it was your safe space.
100%.
Yeah. So, totally. And how you, I can see that, how learning is that line, and then whatever was going on outside of that line, it doesn't mix.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going through those conversations with that lovely therapist, and I'm starting to kind of put the dots together, but I'm still not, I would say, very conscious. I'm becoming conscious of it, but I don't have the full story yet, I think, in my mind. There's still a lot of fragments. But then things going well again in work. I've got a lovely boss again. Everything's going fantastically. Some, again, fantastic leaders around me. So then an organisation that I'm working at goes through a restructure, and it's a really difficult restructure. It's a really badly managed change project, and this is really affecting people around me that I'm working with, some incredible people that I'm working with going through really difficult experiences. And I start to feel some of these difficult kind of emotions and feelings of, I guess, overwhelm come back up again, and I'm recognizing them now from where I've experienced it a little bit before.
So you started to notice a pattern.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Matt. I'm starting to notice the pattern. And then I work through that, I guess. I work through that. We move through the restructure. I find it really difficult. We move through the restructure, and I end up kind of getting another role in the organisation, and I'm managing a large team. And in between, I guess, those points, what happened was I started to then experience insomnia. I've always loved my sleep. I could literally sleep for ages, and I'm starting to notice actually I'm having problems with my sleep, and the problems with my sleep are becoming more and more kind of chronic, to the point where I'm not sleeping for kind of longer than a few hours at a time. And if I'm getting 3 hours, I'm like delighted that I've got 3 hours. And so I think what's going on there, I reach out again I luckily live in an area which has NHS access to the Maudsley Hospital. So I don't know if you've ever come across the Maudsley, and I, through my GP, get referred to another therapist. And this therapist that I get referred to, a guy called Ed Fellows, he has a specialism in working with trauma. And what was really interesting is right from the get-go, Ed was able to have a conversation with me to help me make a lot of linkages to my insomnia, my sense of overwhelm, and what was going on for me in the present, and how that actually linked. While it also was being triggered by the present, it was linking to actually a lot of the things I'd experienced in my past. And that's when I first came across the term PTSD and CPTSD. So for listeners, post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm kind of a bit of an odd fish in that on the surface or the outside, and very high functioning CPTSD person, I guess. So it's kind of, it has been hard, so many people who experience CPTSD can end up with different addictions, can go down lots of very difficult paths. I find it hard to create any of their own stability routine. So I'm learning about this from Ed, and understanding actually why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling a bit more, and actually this is at this point that I start to understand myself better than I have done for years previously to that. And that's when I come across mindfulness for the first time. Now I know mindfulness has become has all sorts of attachments with it now, or connotations for different people, but actually I do know through doing, again, because I'm such a big learner, exploring a lot around mindfulness, I know that for some people it can be incredibly helpful, not for everybody, but I found it fantastic through that time period of insomnia to help me emotionally regulate and to help me just separate out the thoughts in my mind and what was going on. So at this point I'm able to then to start to sleep better. I get more of a sense of coherence, etc., etc. Now, as you'll know as well, Matt, while I've got this kind of personal train running along, and then my professional train running along, I'm deciding that actually, as much as I love doing all the work that I'm doing around leadership and leadership development and working with different organisations around that, and implementing that kind of work, I feel that there's a deeper layer to understanding human beings. And that's when I kind of take my coaching, training, knowledge to date, and I start to then study psychology. And that's when I move into studying coaching psychology and studying positive psychology. And it's actually, moving into that learning environment again and understanding much more. With coaching psychology, it's very much looking at what do we know helps people to learn and develop at an adult level and a child level, and how do we implement that using evidence-based models in a coaching dialogue. And then positive psychology, as we explained earlier on, is very much looking at, what do we know about optimum functioning in human beings? What's the science behind that? And how do we then, integrate that or implement that with individuals or teams or systems? So I'm then moving into doing all this learning again. And one of the, two key things that I learn in doing this is that actually, we have a mental health dual continua. So there's a really famous, important study in psychology. You might have come across this by a guy called Corey Keyes, and done some amazing work, and it's been replicated, and lots has kind of gone on since this particular piece of work that happened in 2003. But he actually was able to identify and articulate that human beings don't exist on one continua where you're either mentally ill or mentally healthy, but we exist on two continua, a dual continua, where we can be both mentally healthy and mentally ill. So we can have components of mental ill health, and we can experience components of mental health. They're not two distinct things, even though society and culture would have us believe that. So this is something I'm really fascinated and interested by, and again, it's something that I'm resonating with, because I've been through very difficult experiences. However, I'm also very enthusiastic, very driven, very motivated. And it's kind of reassuring for me to know that when I am having moments of overwhelm, depressive symptoms, anxious moments, those kind of things that are going on, that that is actually part of our human experience. And there are ways that I can resource myself to kind of move through those experiences that are going to help me.
And also at the same time, I think it's very comforting to know that dual kind of level of existence of we operate on those dual levels of continua, like you said. When you're feeling very, when you're feeling low, when you're feeling depressed, anxious, actually there might be some other parts of your mental health which are actually very, very functioning very, very well. I think often people, can very easily define themselves by their mental ill health. I am depressed, I am anxious, and if you say that enough to yourself, it does, reinforcing that can lead to some very challenging situations. But it's comforting to know that, for every I am anxious or I'm depressed, there could be, but I'm also, I'm also, I don't know, calm. I'm also excited. I'm also, so I wonder, just saying it out loud, for every time we say something negative, let's just think, actually, let's just say something which lies on the other continua, because I wonder, and maybe this is a question, are you, like you said, if it's on a dual continua, are there situations when you could be all negative?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. And I suppose a couple of things I was reflecting when you were reflecting back to me as well there, Matt, is that with the when you say I am, depressed, or I am anxious, or I have got anxiety, I think we are defining ourselves entirely with that experience. And there's a really interesting area of therapy that's also used in coaching called acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yeah.
So you may have come across it. Now, I'm a massive advocate for this. I think it leapfrogs forward from CBT and some of the traditional kind of methods that we've come accustomed to in supporting mental illness and challenges that we're having with our thoughts and feelings. Now, acceptance and commitment therapy helps us recognize ourselves as context. So I'm like a bucket, and inside my bucket there's loads of different things going on, and I'm never going to get rid of some of those things going on, as much as I might want to superplant or supersede or squash it or get rid of this kind of niggly, dark, horrible, despairing feeling that I carry within me. Because actually, the more I try and do that, and the more I try and put it in a box, push it away, try and get rid of it, it will come back and it will bite me on the bum. And actually, what we kind of look at a lot in acceptance and commitment therapy is actually just recognizing that negative emotion, or that kind of horrible feeling that I'm experiencing, it's part of me, but it's not me entirely. So in acceptance and commitment therapy, it's a lot about, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I'm feeling shit at the moment. I'm noticing I'm having the thought that whatever, rather than I am that thought.
I am that, yeah.
I am equal to that.
It brings almost a temporal element into it.
Exactly.
That suggests that these things are temporary.
Yeah. Exactly. They're coming and they're going. And
there's a flow, isn't there?
Exactly. There's a flow. And it's about how can I work with my flow in a given moment where I am at that time with that flow. Mm-hmm. And how can I support myself to do the things that put me in flow for this, that put me in flow for that, but also recognize that I can't always fight or get rid of something which is affecting my flow, but I can work with it a little bit in a different way, or try something in a different way. So I'm learning about the dual continua, Keyes' dual continua, and I'm also learning kind of something that's one of the key areas of study at the moment in positive psychology is called post-traumatic growth. So actually, it's about learning from that we can grow through traumatic experiences. Now, people
which is a hopeful thing to think about, right?
Hugely, and I think, and it's interesting, the word hopeful. So sorry, I'm going off on a tangent on your word hopeful, but with the post-traumatic growth, understanding that actually, when we look at people who've been through certain experiences, and yet they're still resilient and they're still kind of moving through that experience and going on to do this or going on to do that, that's often because they've grown as a result of that experience. Now, it's not that we'd ever want to wish that experience on someone, but there's something happening there in terms of how they've come through that experience. So whether it was the support mechanisms they had around them, the other adult figures, the teacher in the room, the supportive colleague, the boyfriend, the girlfriend, whoever it was that was around that person that helped them go through that experience and come out the other side stronger, so that they knew that they were well resourced to carry on going through the next difficult time they experience. And so I think, learning all about that in my field, and then, feeling, I feel really resourced now. I feel like I've got a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding. I understand myself more. I'm mindful. I put in all these practices in place. Anyway, so I then decide I'm going to go out on my own and work and join forces with another psychologist, and we go into a business together. And fast forward a few more years, we're doing incredibly well, growing the business kind of threefold, and then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from under me, where I get told in what I think is a informal coffee meeting that I'm being removed from my own business. So I go through this really horrific experience.
It must have been horrendous.
There's loads of stories like this. And I go through this experience at the same time as I'm finishing a massive research project. I'm organising a wedding in France, and my then fiance, now husband, gets made redundant from his job at work and goes into a period of long-term unemployment. So all of the things I think I've put in place, and all of the things I think I've got, at my disposal, at my resource, that are helping me along, and all of the things I've talked to my clients about and that I support teams with and I support organizations with, I'm suddenly like, okay, so this is one of those really crap situations where, do I actually know how to deal with this stuff? Am I actually going to get through? And it's horrendous, and it's painful, and it's awful. And I won't go into kind of the detail of that, but I'm going through that horrendous experience, and I can tell you, Matt, like with my hand and my heart, every single resource I'd learned up until that point gets kind of pulled out of my bag. Mindfulness, seeking support.
The toolkit is opened in force.
It is opened in force, and I am so grateful. Not only I've got that toolkit, but I've got everything I've learned through positive psychology and positive psychology interventions. And what do I need to put into practice? Okay, this is all going completely tits up, for want of a better word. But what are the good things going on here? I really enjoy what I'm doing. I love my work. I'm just going to have to start again. I'm going to have to start again from scratch. I've got NDAs against all the clients I've ever worked with. I just need to start again. And you're kind of running like hell for leather on just this adrenaline, this push and this drive. And things get back up and everything like that. Go through the wedding, finish the big research project, work's going really well again. And at that point, though, I am exhausted, because all of those things create such a drain on your emotional energy. But I have learned, I think, to structure my day, my routine, my life in a way that helps me slowly recover from, that's not your everyday experience, but it's helping me kind of learn to recover from that bigger experience. This is, I guess, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, or, also walking the talk in the fact that all of the kind of tools and techniques that I use with people are things that I've used on myself all of the time. So I guess that's a big winded version of my mental health story.
So a question I just had, what you mentioned, especially when you open that toolkit again, the mindfulness came out. Did you? I remember you saying, so when you went to see your second therapist, he helped you link from past, now, and through. Do you think that you needed that link? I forget. So, and you said mindfulness really helped.
Yes.
If you didn't have those links, do you think mindfulness or your toolkit would have helped as much? Because there are some things, there's something we can talk about on this podcast, where it's too painful for people to go in the past. And that's completely understandable. There's some horrendous things that go on. But from having these conversations, it makes me think that actually sometimes you don't need those linkages to be able to have a fulfilling life. You don't always need to go back into the dark and the pain to do that. For you, it seemed like it was very helpful. Did you get a sense that actually that wasn't necessarily necessary, kind of to be able to continue to cope?
Really good question. And these are questions that I ask myself all the time. And when I'm working with a particular client or a team, you've always got that judgment call of, do I go there? Do I go there right now? And it's really interesting. Lots of people refer to it as opening up Pandora's box. So do I want to open up Pandora's box? And ultimately, I guess I'm sharing with you my reflection on that, Matt, and I can kind of talk you through that and why I think that's so important, and we can talk about the research and the evidence, etc. I think everyone's experience is different and their choice is different. Now, I think there are so many things that I have learnt along the way, listening to nice music, reading books that I enjoy, going, things that give me energy in different ways. I could have structured and put them in place on my own, maybe without doing that journey. It's so hard to know because,
yeah, yes, of
I don't know if
there's been one journey.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, I have siblings who decided not to go on that journey.
Right.
And, we discuss that. It's very much it's a conversation that comes up, should I do that? Should I not do that? And then when those crunchy moments come along in life, which they do for everybody, and I must say, Matt, every single leader I work with has crunchy moments. Yeah. And they have moments where they're really challenged and really overwhelmed. And any leader that ever tells you otherwise is not on the planet.
No, it's called life, right?
Exactly.
There are, throughout one's life, there will be horrendous situations. There will be some more horrendous than others, and and we hope that people don't go through, we hope that as a general population, people don't go through some of these horrendous situations. However, you are going to face, negative challenges, but it's things you can't avoid. It's just life, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I find when I'm working with people, supporting people who don't want to open the Pandora's box, which is fine, or take a sibling or, doesn't want to open a Pandora's box, that, those people still move through that time. But I wonder, and I'm curious about how much you're able to move through the future time and the next time and the time after that.
Right, that makes sense.
And I think that there needs to be some deeper work. Now, you can do that deeper work in different ways. It can be a lot about your own self-awareness, self-reflection and things like that. But, I think it's so valuable to do that with an expert, someone who knows what they're doing, and get that support. But do you or don't you? It's a $1 million question. Yeah. But in my experience of those who do, it has a longer term sustainable benefit than those who don't do that work. Now, I must also add into the mix, there are many that don't realise or recognise they might need to do that work. So there are different, going back to the point earlier on about different layers of consciousness, we're all self-aware to different extents for different reasons, etc. And that's okay. That's in some ways could be helpful to that individual. And, we're all kind of on different journeys in our lives. And
it's really interesting. You said, I hadn't quite thought about it. You said you were from a very large Irish family, and you've gone through one journey, and I didn't even click, but actually your siblings and the parents, grandparents, children, whatever, everyone goes through their own journeys, but from that kind of same nucleus. And I suppose from a psychologist point of view, obviously it's families, in some respects, families are a scientific study, but from your perspective, it might be, it's probably interesting to see what some people did in a similar situation to you and what others did, and how that's worked out. Not to say anyone's worked out better or not, but it just works out differently. Do you feel, and please feel free not to answer this, but do you feel that the journey that you made in comparison to, let's say, choices that other people made, it seems like you're very happy that you opened Pandora's box, frankly?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I am a big advocate. If you want me to come off the fence, which I think what you're asking me to do, Matt, I'm a big advocate for opening the Pandora's box.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But I also would say, I've been privileged to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, good point.
So I've been really privileged in many different ways to be able to do that. So equally, I totally understand and respect when people don't. But I think the evidence shows us, and my own personal experience has shown me that actually it's worth doing if you can.
And I think you make a very good point. We've got to be very sensitive that Pandora's box is a one-way thing, and especially a process of kind of self-determination and self-discovery is also a one-way thing. Once you go deep inside, you can't forget about it, and what you find there you might not like. But I suppose, and it's funny. It's not about being brave, or it's not about having courage. It's almost, from reflection and conversations I've had with other people, it's how desperate are you to overcome what you are wanting to overcome.
Exactly.
I think, and I don't, desperate's maybe the wrong word, but how motivated are you that you really want to get through this, and therefore it's worth doing that. It's almost like it's a cost benefit in a way, isn't it?
I completely agree with you. And going back to what we were saying earlier on about that motivation piece and behaviour change piece, I think you've either got to be in the position where you're about to lose something that really matters to you, or you're in a position where you stand to gain a lot. So I think there's a kind of tipping balance there.
And I think what you allude to there, there's some very powerful cognitive biases around gain and loss and whatever we're predisposed as, but we do value certain things in a certain way, and if we are perceiving an amplified gain or a significant loss or deficit, actually your behavior can be steered in quite dramatically in a direction which you never thought was actually possible.
Exactly. I completely agree with you there.
Something I wanted to talk about as we kind of wind up a bit is you've mentioned some of the things that mindfulness in particular that have helped you. As you went through a few years ago a horrendous situation which related to your professional life, and the reality is that there no one wants to say it, but there are going to be situations in the future where all of us are going to stumble again, and that toolkit will come open again. Or what other things are in there? Because I think you made a really good point, and this is something we advocate a lot for Sidekick. Like, the whole reason that we set up Sidekick was nothing to do with replacing therapy. Not at all. It's like intensive intervention and talking therapies are very, very important. Our point was, okay, well, what happens in between? What happens when you go to bed at night, you're on your own, and you close your door and you turn off your light? Talking to you? Well, no one's talking to you. And actually what support do you have during those times? And you've mentioned you've designed and structured your life in a way that enables you to kind of to feed your mind, body and soul in a way that promotes yourself to be fulfilled. What other things do you do?
Really good question, and happy to kind of share some thoughts on that. Just kind of going back to your point there, Matt, around with when I was talking about the dual continua. So you were talking about whether we open the Pandora's box or not, and I was talking about my personal circumstance. Now, Keyes' study shows that there is a huge part of the population that aren't suffering from maybe mental illness challenges, but they're in a state of what we call languishing. So this is a state where we are neither strong in the mental health space or strong in the mental illness space, but we're in a space where we're languishing. And so some of the things that I'm going to share and connect with you are relevant for those who are going through trauma and those who are languishing, because actually all of us should be actively working on our mental health, whoever we are, so that we resource and build up this kind of, resource bank, capacity for when stuff will go wrong, which it will do. So for example, when the pandemic hit, the way that's affected everybody, no matter how they were feeling or thinking, before that moment to where they were then. So I think, this is stuff for you to kind of consider and think about, regardless of where you are in your kind of mental health journey. But so obviously we spoke about mindfulness. I'm a big believer in structure and crafting what you do. So I guess there's different ways that I structure and craft what I do. So routines in my week, routines not at the weekend. I try and avoid routine at the weekends.
So forcing yourself out of a routine.
Or just kind of mixing that up. But, having morning routines. So something that I've been experimenting now for a while is about, making sure I'm doing certain things in the morning which make me feel really kind of strong and resourced when I'm going into my day. So I always start every morning with some mindfulness or some silence or some meditation. I do affirmations. So I think about the things that I'm working towards. I do visualization. I think visualization is incredibly powerful and supportive in kind of somatic experience and gearing yourself up. Exercise is huge for me. So making sure I'm regularly exercising in all different ways, strength, flexibility, walking, all of those, it's a massive lifesaver. reading, getting all the kind of recovery that I need, the different types of recovery. So, you know, quality relationships, like identifying who are my quality relationships, who are the people that give me the emotional energy that I need, the different types of energy that I need for different times, working out who they are. And then I guess the things that I think are really important for us all to know and understand is what our values are. So who do I stand for as a human being? What is really important to me? What really matters to me? How do I know that? And if that is what really matters to me, if these things are really important to me, these things are my values. So for example, a couple of my values are curiousness, connectivity. So it's really important for me to work with other people, to be learning through the work that I do. And I can go on and on. If I'm not putting those values to work in my day-to-day, in my life, you know, that is not going to be helping me find fulfillment. If I have to ignore my values on a day-to-day basis, if the team I'm part of, the organization I'm working for, will not kind of integrate those values into the way they're working, I'm not going to feel aligned. So I'm not going to feel fully aligned. And then the other thing that's really important for me is understanding what my character strengths are, my personality strengths are, and making sure, as well as applying and working to my values, I'm applying and working with my strengths, and that I'm embedding my strengths in the way that we work. So I'm sure it won't surprise you, but, you know, some of my strengths are things like social intelligence, like love of learning, love. I, you know, want to kind of support people, help people. Developing others is one of my strengths. So I get so much energy from bringing people and developing in their own journeys. So all of these things are important to me, that they're part of my work and my life. So, you know, I've been, again, very fortunate, and also crafted my world to kind of run my own business, to do the work that I do, I can choose who I work with, how I work with them. So that is a massive luxury that I appreciate. But, you know, it's taken a lot of sacrifices and challenges to get there. But because I knew what my values were and what my strengths were, I've been able to kind of help those, to use those to guide me, to make sure I'm getting to where I want to get to. So, you know, that's really important to me. And just always being curious, I think, always being open-minded and kind of encouraging myself to be like that. You know, unconditional positive regard. And just kind of actually not just, I guess, going back to the point you were making then about we have these cognitive biases that, you know, society kind of inflicts and informs them on us, you know, making sure I've always got a critical mind about what I'm consuming and what I'm thinking, and the conversations that I'm having, and noticing when I'm, you know, when I'm going off in a kind of extreme black and white way of thinking, dramatization, anything that's kind of going too far one way or the other, as a kind of bit of a sense check for myself. So I hope that's kind of helpful.
It's great because you're talking from both a personal, and also I can see you bringing all your professional, you know, and all your qualifications into this as well. And it seems that what, you know, under all that, under these calls, like, I suppose it's a vision and design of a life, and the parameters around that design for a life, that what, you know, is the life that you want to live and want to achieve. So we can talk about values, strengths, capabilities, mindfulness, walking, exercise, but all of those have got to fit together. And what you described in terms of some of the things you do, I mean, you know, those exercises, I suppose if you did them all at once, it'll probably take a day a week. But the reality is actually you can slot them into different points when you need them.
Yeah.
You can open up the toolkit when you really need it, and slot those little pieces in whilst you do get on with, which you described not as the mundane, but the day-to-day. It's going to work, paying the bills, etc., etc., etc. And then also going through the kind of negativities in that, like not all relationships. I mean, you're married, I'm married. You know, like marriage it's not all positive. It does. I mean, it is very positive, but it's also, especially during a pandemic, it's a challenge. Like there are challenges, and people are pushed together where, in situations where you haven't necessarily seen so much of each other. And some I've got friends who are like, this is not what these vows, I didn't take those vows for this. But you do, you are, and I think during the pandemic, like life has been, a redesign or reevaluation has been forced onto a lot of people. Those maybe, let's say, working in construction, where the day-to-day job hasn't necessarily changed, that might not work, and not just singling out construction, but teaching, etc. Whereas actually, where everyone's working from home, there is a big opportunity to reevaluate and redesign and create the time, not just to do more work, but to reflect on your own mental health and maybe take a little peek into Pandora's box,
really,
2 hands firmly on it.
Or just open it all up, but just get it out, because this is one life, one life. But I think we have to make time for these things. I think if these things have to be made time for. I have to make time for them every day. They are my lifeline. They are very incredibly helpful, and I know you kind of spoke about construction and education there, but I think if I'm an engineer, or I'm a jointer, or whatever I'm doing, I need to also make time for this stuff. I know that my day-to-day is going to be hectic, but how do I structure my morning or my evening or my break time? And I work with a lot of education professionals as well, and often there's that kind of busyness. I haven't got time to do these things, we don't have time not to do these things. And if you are genuinely working in an environment and you're a skill, you're working in construction, you're working with teaching, I'm sure you can go and find a job somewhere else with those skills. If you genuinely don't think you can structure your life to help you balance yourself in what you're doing now, but actually I'm really certain that you can do that in your own world.
And I think some of the exercises that you described, you often just need to sit in a chair, right? Yes, there might be a little bit of kind of curiosity and learning about how to do some of the exercises, but actually, if you're commuting is always a good one. You can close your eyes, and actually you've got 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I know people haven't done a commute in a long time, but you can just sit there for 15, 20 minutes and work through your chat. People talk, doing in the morning gratitude journaling, for example. It doesn't work for some people, works for others. But I mean, gratitude journaling isn't rocket science. You ask yourself the question, what are you grateful for? And it's amazing. Like for me, like you say 5 things and suddenly you feel better. Like I don't know the psychology behind it, but it works.
Well, it's really interesting, because anyway, I won't go too much into that, but actually doing the gratitude exercises every day doesn't have a huge benefit for you, but mixing them up and doing them fairly, you could do it 5 days and then mix it up with something else. Because the thing is, we have a hedonic, we have an adaptation to anything that kind of gives us a boost. So just mixing things up, but going back to your nice kind of metaphor analogy of the toolbox, knowing that you can dip in and get some of that when you need that, and you've got those 5 minutes is really great.
And I think by training yourself to doing it 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, one that I've certainly experienced, that when those bad situations do come, you're going to be much better prepared.
Totally and utterly. Just think it gives you an anchor, so that when the waves crash against the ship, you've got more of a basis. Now you're still going to rock from side to side, and that's definitely going to happen, but you've got something just holding you down a little bit, so you feel a bit stronger through that next wave that's going to hit you sideways. Because
if there's one thing that's inevitable, there will be another bloody wave.
100%, and not just the pandemic either.
Well, Cornelia, I think that's a great place to kind of finish off. Thank you so much for your time, not only like sharing your personal journey, but also your enormous wealth of experience and how that's related to your own personal experience as well. Thank you so much for our chat.
Thank you, and thank you for asking such great questions, Matt. I really appreciate it.
I'm fundamentally, you're a very interesting person. It's very easy, to be honest. And also, thank you so much to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search for Psychic Community or Psychic Stories, and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show, and do check out our free Psychic app for iPhone and iPad. I've been talking about a mental health toolkit, but that is a little bit of product placement there. We do have a little toolkit tab on our app, but the point is, as Cornelia has described, finding exercises that work for you And doing those exercises on a regular basis, we believe, can lead to a more kind of a state of a more positive, kind of, I say, positive mental health. And it's, you know, and the app enables you to build that personalized wellbeing toolkit from a whole selection of exercises, stuff you might not like, but that's okay, because hopefully there'll be enough in there that you will like and that will help you through some of those life challenges. And to help you deal with life's ups and downs, just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Cornelia, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Matt.